Hi guys, this is just a little recap video to run over some of the things we were talking about on the last one because something happened with the audio on the laptop. Not sure why it didn't come through. I think it was just struggling with a hot day, things not working. So essentially what we were running through is trying to figure out how to maximize our shadows and add an extra layer of reality to the render to make that real killer money shot. So what we've got here is the original shadow that we rendered out from SketchUp, but as you can see it's still quite monotonous. It's only one tone that's there, so we want to end up with something a little more like this, with some painted in shadow where we can get a real sense of depth to the image by following along the edges. And a rule of thumb, what we want to do is focus on edge points and places where things meet and paint those a little bit darker, and then where they come out to their own areas, you make those a little bit lighter, and that would usually give a sense of depth to the image, particularly where things are sitting by themselves. We can see along this edge here we've painted to give it a sense that it's coming forward, and in these points of intersection here where it gets a little bit deeper, we start to do that as well. And so we'll just walk through how this starts to happen. So first things first, we want to start on a new layer. We want to get our brush tool out, make it nice and small, and then we want to be working on black at an opacity around about 10%, and then essentially what we want to do from there is to start painting in shadow. So if we zoom into this little corner here for starters, make our brush nice and small, we'll paint on some black along these edges. Again, just keep layering up that black, make your brush a little bit bigger so that it starts to spread the black, and this is what we want to work with here. And what we'll end up with is a nice bit of shadow there, and we can lower the opacity later so that it's not so dark. Again, we come along through this edge here, make it a little bit darker, increase the size of the brush, and starts to work on that again, as you can see. So just purely by doing that, we're making this edge seem a little bit more pronounced, a little bit more vibrant. We want to do the same thing again with this arc around here. We want to start to paint in some shadow to really emphasize this sort of extrusion along here. So just nice and simple, painting that brush. And you can hear my MacBook again struggling, still another hot day here while we're doing this rendering. So the point of making your brush bigger as you're going means it sort of spreads the lighting out so that it doesn't just seem like one thick line. And the best way to do that is, of course, by using a soft brush when you're doing that on the lighting. So we've got a good amount of dark edge here. Again, we can come back through and really thicken that up. And then what we want to do is get rid of all the black that is on this material and make a nice sharp edge to the shadow there. So the way that we do that is we come down to the layer that the material's on, this sort of orange timbery looking stuff. If you right click on the layer thumbnail, come up to select pixels, what you can do from there is just, delete from the shadow. So we want to go back up to the shadow layer now that we've selected those pixels, and we're going to delete from that. And what that does, as we can see here, is a nice sharp line to our shadow now because we've deleted that out. So if I put that back on there, you'll see that the shadow is quite thick and dense and doesn't really have a line. Whereas if we redo that, there we go. We end up with this nice sharp line to the shadow, which really emphasizes that thickness. And again, later obviously we'll come back and lower the opacity so it's not so dark, to your personal taste and to how you want this thing to look. So again, just reiterating, these edge conditions is where you want to focus on your shadow, along through there, points that are a little bit darker, to the stairs, things where there are creases, things like that. Obviously there's going to be ambient shadow and ambient lighting, and that's where we want to add our shadows into there. So it's really a matter of playing around and seeing what works for you and what you're interested in doing, and adding shadow where you want to do that and what you want to achieve. So the second thing we want to do is to create an overall ambient shadow. So you'll notice that SketchUp has got an overall lighting sort of coming from one direction. We want to do an overall shadow coming from one direction as well to match that so that it feels a little bit more realistic. So if we pick this sort of back end of this space here, and we start with a small brush, as we can see a small circle there, and we just start painting in at our 10% opacity. And this is really going to test your machine now as you're building it from this, and slowly increasing the size of our brush as we come across here. And don't worry if it gets too dark. There we go, we're going to lower that opacity later in a second. And what that's going to do, now if we lower this opacity, means that the darkness is coming from one spot rather than it being so light all over the place. There's also a sense of depth and darkness to the image as well. So now we can see that light is obviously coming from this outer edge on the outside, whereas there's a sense of shadow and depth on the inside. And again, we start to paint in with this brush in these areas that we deem to be darker, and along these edges really does give a sense of depth to that drawing. And then again, play with the opacities and these things. So just to repeat, we've got one layer which is our shadow and our edges, and we've got another layer which is our overall opacity, darkness, which sort of gives a sense of depth and orientation for where that shadow should be coming from. And then also using the select pixel tool, so right click on the layer that you want to select inside the little icon to bring up select pixels. So that's around that edge now, and it means I can cut out everything that's outside of that so that I'm not painting shadow where it shouldn't be painted. And that's a really handy tool to cut out areas that are the same size as other things that you've already painted on. So that's essentially what was shown in the other video. Hopefully the audio works a little better this time so you can build up your shadows and create those epic money shots that we want to see. Make sure to ask many questions in class. I hope you enjoyed this video tutorial, and we will see you shortly. Okay guys, thanks very much. Cheers.